Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for May of 2026. There are 10 albums from this year that I spawned over the last month that I will be talking about in this video with time codes listed in the description for each individual review. If you would like to skip around in the video, most of this month was spent checking out a handful of the things that did come out in May while doing some personal catch up from stuff I shelved by the end of April. Either way, if you are excited to hear my thoughts on these records, give this video a like, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The first album I'll be talking about is one that I pushed off to May, unfortunately, but it came out around my birthday, a time that a lot was going on, and I wanted to give the newest album by one of my personal favorite bands, They Might Be Giants, some real time, and so I did. And The World Is to Dig is a record that I think very much balances the worlds of showing one's strengths and how to modernize them. I think it is a very much indicative of this group's style of release, but it shows how strong their comfort zone is, so to speak. You know, while it tries to sort of like introduce this album with these sort of like menagerie of quirky ideas via the swagger of Back to Los Angeles to the more idiosyncratic Wu-Tang, that idiosyncratic side very much feels like the more bloodline of this album. But man, do I just fucking love what these guys got going on. Again, it might be a bias because one of my personal favorite bands. I really enjoy this more so than the quirky offshoots they were teasing on the last album of theirs I checked out, I Like Fun. Maybe it's because I also think the sonics on this being so full lend to the eccentric sonic ideas that these guys normally tap into. This very much has some ideas that feel in line with some of the offshoots that are on the lighter side of the eccentricities of an album like Apollo 18. It's not quite as off the wall as that record, but it's got some teasings of it in the sonics in a way that feels more so than like a Factory Showroom or like a John Henry. While there's parts of this that feel more in line with their late 90s stuff, like the aforementioned Wu-Tang, parts of the record like Telescope also feel very in line with the attitude that this band has shown in the past. Same with Get Down. I love the horn use on that. It feels very like, again, Apollo 11 adjacent, but in a modern funk sort of way. And a funky vibe in this isn't something I don't unexpect from this, considering some of their parts of their career. But to see them do it in such like a straightforward way, I think is one of the more interesting things, and how well they handle it. Because the same can be said on the following groove throughout New Wave Will Never Die. It's a record that exudes the personality that I go to this band for, and I think they executed on here magnificently. And that eccentric, esoteric side isn't just shown off in the sonics. You know, the songwriting also has that twist to it that I really enjoy, like the French hook within Je n'ai pas, or throughout Wu-Tang, a song that when it released very much captivated parts of the blogosphere. But also just songs like the cover they did, Overnight Sensation, or the songwriting within songs like Character Flaw and In the Dead Mall on the back half. Two songs that also, again, feel very much within the bloodline of this band, just showing that those styles modernized in a way that I absolutely enjoy. If there's a new record from this year that I was excited for and excited to see it actually smash, it is this. And I'm glad that I gave it the time that I feel like it deserves, because it is a fantastic record. A great thing to release around my birthday, and it's a banger release. This shit's an 8 out of 10. It's high up there for this year for me, for sure. And if you want just like a great alternative rock album from this year, from some vets, just showing their style, hasn't lost a beat, there you go.
Back to the crowd, all working, and this bitch bunker down with insurgent.
When this Surf Gang record was announced, I know a lot of people, myself included, were hoping more of like a marriage of worlds, but when they revealed it was more of like here's a Mike album, and here's an Earl album, under the same sort of creative spirit. It was at least a bit of a head-scratcher, to say the least, because both of these artists, they've worked together here and there. You know, they both sit in the same circles, and it made sense for them to sort of do, like, a record together. I did see, like, comparisons online, and even on the fucking Apple Music page, sort of comparing this to a record like the Speaker Box, Love Below, Outcast record. And while I get why those are made because of the fact that they're just kind of like two records, what sets that record apart from this is that Speaker Box, Love Below are two records that really only have a kinship together because Outcasts have been a thing for so long. They have this, sound together. But the beauty of that record is not only where they coalesce, but it shows how far their creative wings have spread apart. This Surf King record just feels like two records that not only feel like they should be put together in some instances, both artists feel like they should be on each other's respective halves more. While both halves do their parts to really stick to their own respective solo strengths, like the Mike record has a lot of the same types of bangers that, like, production-wise, I've come to hear from him in, certain ways. The ways that, like, My Worst and Minty and even Shutter Island just go off and create just this booming space for Mike to deliver his hazy bars over. It feels like very in line with what I've heard from him in the little bits I've heard. But the synth choices and all that are what really tie these records together. And I think it's an interesting avenue and point of unity, because I think that they do flavor these beats in interesting ways, like on Shutter Island or on Minty, or even in some of the haziness throughout Da Bid and Back LA. I think that, like, the Mike half has some really nice strengths, and similarly to your typical Mike project, it doesn't really stick around for all too long. And the tongue-in-cheek and almost bravado that carries throughout #free #Mike, and the frame of that song does crop out throughout parts of the Earl disc as well as parts of the Mike disc that also helps further unify them. The off-kilter moments that sort of twist with the Earl project are also sort of like an interesting separation point that I think, again, just kind of beg to be woven throughout the hazy bangers that Mike is pulling together. There's some really cool ideas on here. And there's an interesting sort of, like, pivot point emotionally in parts of this that, like, don't really sit in the same place that Earl's record from last year left us. And what I think is interesting about looking at this as an Earl project is that I personally think it's a little bit of a sort of step down. I think that it's creatively got a cool sound, and I think it's got some cool vibes, and it's honestly got some interesting, again, sort of emotional points, like the points through Home on the Range through Hot Water. It's an interesting three-piece that sort of, like, has this through line that I like seeing Earl explore, especially considering a lot of his music has felt not like this in mood. What I liked about his last record is where he took his mood. It was a mood that he was sort of, like, stewing with for a while, and this project sort of sees him sidestepping in ways that, like, are still nice, but I don't think I like as much. Like, I love the vibes on Quick and Chally Tuna. I think that, like, Chally Tuna has, like, a really, really nice instrumental. It's a good point of, like, again, the style of this record sonically feeling like a nice weaving of worlds with the, like, Mike half, the Surf Gang moniker, so to speak. And again, in true modern Earl fashion, his half is also, like, relatively brief. I think that the meeting of these worlds is nice, but I wish they kind of met a little more, if I'm being honest. I'm going to give this a 7. I think it is a really solid album from these two. But similarly to the War Deer record, if we're going down the Earl pipeline, sometimes when you get what you ask for, it's just not quite what you were expecting.
I was born cursed with 2 left feet that I can't keep.
If there's one thing that's for certain, anytime this band drops something, I'm going to be there to see what the fuck the Sonics are going to be doing and where this band explores their emotions the older that they get. What I think is interesting about this album and their last album comparatively is how within these two records they sort of show how far their umbrella stretches. One of the things I admire about both of these albums is how they, in some of the highest highs on the record, put what bold imagery or bold, like, color schemes they work with on their album covers a chance to shine. It showed on tracks like Silhouettes and the collab with Hayley Williams on their last album. It shows very much on here throughout the rising crescendo throughout the wash-in that is the opener, Man Overboard, where these layers sort of like culminate together into this really nice climax that sets a sort of heavier stage sonically that gets more shown lyrically over the next couple of songs, but it's sort of like that push and pull that the band does there a decent amount. And I like how those sonics sort of get brought back up and we get a bit more bold with it throughout some of the parts of Bad Moons, and the same on that bold bass production on a track like Patron Saint of Pele. While not necessarily a heavy song, I think that the production shift and the focus on a different type of groove lets the mood of this album dance in a different world that I very much enjoy. I also like how it sort of goes a bit harder in its sort of like, I don't want to say aggression, but it takes this sort of mood that's been danced around in on tracks like Blood on My Blood and No Feeling and lets it go a bit harder towards the listener. I really like that about it. And I like how after the Patron Saint of Pele, we sort of get this like beginning of the end for the final stretch of the record where this wistfulness really starts to like take back a hold of the listener and the sonics, and we sort of see these emotions get sunsetted in their own way. There's a dark ennui to the record's close, but I really enjoy how it sort of takes a different approach on boldness in a way that still kind of gives the listener a nice close without necessarily keep leaving the emotions behind as the album closes. One of the things I do wish this album did a little more, but I do like the moments when it does happen, especially through the lenses of Lullaby and the one with the piano, are how they use horns on here. Like, I enjoy their presence in the band's catalog as a whole, and I kind of wish this album had them more in certain, parts where the soundscape kind of feels maybe a bit too sparse, but I like their presence here and how they lend to the emotions. They were just a component that I liked the use of, but left me wanting more of it in the sonics. I still like this album a lot, though. I think that it is really, really strong. I think that the unity of this band is still strong. I think that they just know how to capture a mood as a whole package, and I think they did so once again on here. I want to give this like an 8 out of 10. It's a really, really good album. I don't know if it'll end up super high on my of the year list. I guess that depends on what the year has going on. But as of right now, it is, because I think it is a really strong album, but it's one of those that I could see definitely falling a bit lower as the year goes on because of some of its weaker components or some songs and ideas that I just don't feel like have as much time to shine as I would like to have seen. Chicago synth dude and friend of the channel, Brady Matteson, bestowed the public with another record, Solaris, a record he wanted to know my thoughts on, and I wanted to give it some proper time, because it's a record that feels very meditative, but purposefully meditative, with where it takes that meditation, and I really appreciate that about it. I also dig the scope of this record. It's got some bold sounding sonics. The lows on this thing were honestly pretty fucking huge. While I liked the sort of like bits of that were also throughout his last record, Sirens from Monoliths, I really felt like he was trying to push for bigger ideas. I feel like he very much hits those ideas even harder on Solaris. There's a real drop in the opener, All We Leave, We Love Still, that really just fucking like rug pulls you, and I think does so very successfully. It's a cool moment. This album very much spends its time stewing in an atmosphere, but I think that like the moments where he shifts the listener ever so slightly in this space, and where that subtle shift eventually takes you is what I think is the more interesting place, is the more interesting part of this album. There's an unease that brings the listener in on Sounds from Your Inside Dreams that kind of washes away, but then sort of like surges back through its final moments to kind of keep the listener in this uneasy space. But I love the use of tension throughout that song. There's also a really nice moment amidst the calmness of that song where like he has this modular synth come in that I think is really cool. The way that the anxiety from sounds from inside your dreams sort of also washes away into these grander cosmos amidst Beyond Gates of Time, which has another just really cool drop moment. I think is fucking sick. This album is cool. I really dig this album. He just finished a tour, and he'll be going on another tour that if you were in the Midwest area, you should check out. He's got other albums that I've reviewed on the channel. He's very much just a chill dude who makes really nice music that I think if you enjoy ambient tunes, you would enjoy the music of. You know, when it comes to like building a world, while it's maybe more in the feel of the project, I think it very much sticks the landing in doing so. And I think the synth choices themselves lend to this not only spacey feeling, but cerebral feeling. Something that I think is a piece of parts of his music, but where he takes that that insular sort of emotional feel in this sort of space, I think is also equally as interesting. I give this album like an 8 out of 10. I think this might be his best album. You know, I thought Sirens for Monoliths may have taken that moniker, but he just keeps taking that next step for himself that I enjoy. There's some real intensity on this project that I admire as somebody who's loved very big, bold sonics in a record. You know, it's funny, there's a bit that I wanted to bring back at the end of this year that was the name of my best of the year for 2016 list, Cosmic Emos Forever. But this is like, as far as cosmic sounds in an emotional space, Solaris very much has that. It is the poster child for that Cosmic Emos moniker. Great stuff. Really enjoy it. And I think if you like ambient music, you'd enjoy it as well.
No, it ain't gonna hurt. Slowing it down. Just a couple no.
While I've been following Kacey Musgraves for 8 years at this point, and I would consider myself a fan of her music, one thing I've really enjoyed about following her music outside of the records that I enjoy is seeing where she decides to take her sound. You know, while her last album, Deeper Well, saw her sort of in a meditative state at home, trying to sort of rediscover oneself. What I love about Middle of Nowhere is that within those new horizons on the other side, she finds herself back home, but trying to like capture that feel, both in a nostalgic lens and in the reality of the now. You know, there are moments of looking back in earnest and in a sort of tongue-in-cheek sort of way. It's an album that gets a really nice blending of ideas together and a nice sonic palette that I honestly wish was a little more prominent, but I think that when it does shine, it really fills out into a good sound. You know, while I enjoy the very, like, straightforward and lean cuts like Abilene and Loneliest Girl, I think the album really reaches its highs throughout the closing stretches via the collabs with, like, Miranda Lambert on Horses and Divorces and with Willie Nelson, which is a fun sort of, like, follow-up from the hook of that with Uncertain Texas. Both also having this embracing of, like, Latin music that I think really works in the world she's trying to pull together, and that's sort of like something I'd love to see on some of the other early cuts in the album. You know, like I very much love the groove of Back on the Moon, but I think it could use a little more in the sonics with its groove that I think would help sort of like sell the sort of love side of the fight going on, you know what I mean? That said, though, the early stretches of the record do have other bangers like I Believe in Ghosts. Like, this is a pretty great record, in my opinion. I think that this album is a pretty nice step up from Deeper Well, an album that I enjoyed, but kind of wish had a little more going on in a similar breath, but I think that this album sort of stands stronger in those moments where I was, maybe wanting more. Like, I think there's tracks on both ends that I'm not the biggest fan of, but I think by the by, this record still stands above at least her last album. I'm gonna give it like an 8 out of 10. I think it's a really good album. I think that like if you enjoy her style of like insular songwriting, while also sort of like putting oneself in a world, I think it does that pretty solidly.
Me, baby. Call my phone and say you need me, baby.
On the opening song of this album, Drake really pushes this idea of being told to dig deeper, but bucking against that trend. And it's that sort of resistance to exploring one's true self that I think feels like the real heartbeat of this album in a way that I just don't think is what I really wanted. Does he talk about the beef? Yes. Something that I did want him to talk about. But, God, his perspective is so jaded. I wrote a song on my album Pocket Project that is a remix of the Far Side classic Runnin', and it takes the idea of running from your problems through the lenses of nostalgia and sort of fighting those urges to do so. Something that I feel like Drake really tries to do throughout parts of this. You know, he sounds like just a really closed-off, jaded guy. He sounds icy in tone, but that ice is not like a hard, cold, like, stoic warrior. It just sounds like a just whiny child who just refuses to accept an L. And look, in life, we all have to take L's. I've taken L's. Everyone in their life has taken L's. And Drake, at this point, has had 2 L's pushed in his face, both of which heavy in their own respects and large in their own respects. But what I think is interesting about this versus how it was tackled on the follow-up to a beef he gave us in 2018, Scorpion, is that he doesn't really do what he did on that record here. While there were some parts where he really tried to talk about his kid in earnestness in a couple lines of parts of Scorpion, he also gives the people that like him for his hits a lot of that. In ways that I tried to showcase in my Redacted, but I mean, the record is still a bit long. The problem with Iceman is that it may not be the longest Drake project. It uses its time to try to jingle keys its way through addressing a lot of crazy shit that happened to him over the last couple of years. And I just think that's a real disservice to the art of tackling beef in hip-hop. Like, I'm not saying it has to escalate to a degree that it did, but especially considering this album was also followed by 2 other different sounding records that I'm assuming try to run farther away from addressing what was going on. I think the ways that he does so on here have that same kind of like bratty tinge that, again, the aforementioned childlike energy he's retaining throughout a lot of this feels in service to. Like, he spends a lot of this record, you know, sort of like waving this bravado around that he is so unbothered and that he doesn't care about, you know, what was said about him. And he very much has this, like, I don't care, that shit sucked anyway energy. And also tries to make a track like Run to Atlanta that's supposed to spit back in the face of some bars from Not Like Us. It's just got a weird energy, man. And I don't really like the energy of it. I will say some of the beat selection's nice, but that's something that Drake has a pretty decent ratio of, especially considering how large his scale of music typically is when it comes out. It very much is a kitchen sink approach to some degree. He just took it to another level with the release of Iceman with the Habib T and Maid of Honor records that, again, I'm not talking about this video. The highlights for me on this album are few and far between what I think are a lot of stretches of dullness, but like, I think Make Them Cry is a solid mission statement. It is an idea that I kind of was hoping would be more explored on here, and it just wasn't, and that's unfortunate. I think Janice Shut the Fuck Up has the earworm of the record on here, because I've had Teach Me Baby in my head, just out and about. I like Run to Atlanta, but again, I like seeing Drake and Future come together from time to time, and it's not the worst collaboration that I think has been wrought of these two. It's another solid instrumental that kind of goes off. And while I think his Too Short reference is very, again, cheeky on Too Hot for the Radio, I just don't think his version of like a Squabble Up hits as hard as the energy that was channeled. And I think it's because he doesn't have like an album's worth of attitude to back up that energy. It's also like just a much softer version. It's like a very much just like diet version of that like West Coast style that not only like was Kendrick really tapping into on GNX, but the West was really loud in 2024 in ways that I really appreciated. And I don't think Drake's version of that is all that interesting. It feels more like Drake trying to do what he does, and that's like just trying to copy what's hot. It's just unfortunate for him that what's hot happens to be people actually just going at him But I digress. The attitude of that song really kind of feels like where a lot of my biggest issues of the record stem from, that just sort of pop out more on other tracks. Like Shebang, I've seen that song memed a lot. It's deservedly so. That song is ass. I really hate the breakdown on Dust. I think that, like... And I've seen people talk about, like, there being too many beat switches on this record, and I think that stems from the fact that, like, the purpose of them on here feels different. It feels more in service of just trying to rush the listener through to the next idea so that you're not thinking too hard about what's going on. What I think is more interesting, honestly, is by the end of this record, I think the better explored topic isn't really the beef or any of the other beefs and things that he had going on. It was him talking to the label, something that also felt like further shown with the dropping of the other two albums. Those feel less like albums with purpose and feel more like I'm trying to get out of my deal so that I can do my own thing. And I don't blame him for doing that. If you want to escape the industry machine, go for it, my guy. But I don't think that, like, Iceman being the big record is really helping, because I don't think Iceman is that big album. Like, Plot Twist has moments that I feel like really work better for him, and it feels like because he's talking less about the stuff that I was more wanting to hear. But I think it lends to more interesting commentary, honestly, which is kind of some bullshit. It's the same thing I've sort of ragged on artists like Tech9 for doing, because they've reached this monolithic scale that a lot of that sort of, like, bigger ideas and problems are just something I can't relate to, nor do I have really an interest of relating to. While, yes, money and fame would be cool, I don't want to think about the shit that would set me back while I'm that up. While I appreciate this album for being on the shorter side of some Drake records, I just don't think it necessarily goes as hard as I was wanting it to. I was hoping this would feel more like a record with the attitude of, like, if you're reading this is too late, and it feels like it's trying to step with that, but it's got the energy of a record like CLB behind it more so, and I think that's also just my biggest problem, is it's a record that doesn't have the focus I was hoping it would, quite to the intensity that it feels like it's leading with, and while it's got some solid instrumentals with some solid tracks in the midst, there's a lot of this that I just don't think lends to an interesting spin to me. I'm giving this a 3. I don't think it's all that great. It's not the worst thing Drake's done. It's not my least favorite Drake has done, but it's on that lower echelon of his catalog, in my opinion. I'm not gonna lie, while I was aware of Angie de Poitrine for a hot second before this point, I'm covering this because I've talked about these guys in spaces I hadn't expected because of how niche their kind of sound is. But, like, kudos to these two for proving that microtonal music has a place in public spaces beyond the reaches of where a band that some people might throw comparisons to some of the sounds of to being in the likes of, like, King Gizzard. I think these guys very much transcend that peg into something else, but I really love that something else on the other side. There's twinges of this throughout the grooves on Sarnies that feel more inspired by, like, what Les Claypool has done with these kind of sounds and ideas, and I really dig the groove construction that they pull together as a whole throughout these, like, more jammy pockets of the record, like on Matteson, which is a song that, like, very much feels more in the spirit of that kind of, like, King Gizzard comparison that I'm not going to try and really make, because, like, yeah, some of the sonics are similar, but I think that's just more of a rod of a preference of style and less of, like, an homage or anything to another. I do dig the vibes on this, though. I think that it's just kind of weird, and I dig that about it. Honestly, one group it kind of reminds me of in absurdity isn't from this current crop of bands at all. It's actually Klaatu. Shout out to Klaatu for those that know. While these guys do kind of like a fun pseudo-farce on, like, psych pop, these guys do it with, like, microtonal rock and, like, have some fun ideas in that lane that very much still feel in service to what that lane has thriving in style and just overall progginess. I dig this project a decent amount, I'm not gonna lie. Like, you can't tell me the breakdown in Your Zara doesn't sound like Primus circa, like, 95, man. I dig the production that they work with as a whole. I think it lets their bass pop. You have this kind of bass production, I'm already going to be kind of sold on what you got going on, or at least have interest in what you got going on, because you know how to make a bass sound really nice in the pocket, while having these guitars that both dance in the worlds of psychedelia and some, like, crunchy ideas in the veins of, like, desert rock and psychedelic rock, both in the spirits of like microtonal bending. It's just some cool ideas, some really cool ideas on a project that I think is pretty damn fun. I'm glad that I'm glad that there's some moments in this that have caught legs. I like that this band has sort of made a name for themselves in their own respect. They're keeping Weird alive in optics and in sonics. I'm giving this an 8. I think it's honestly really, really fun. I think it's a fun-ass rock album that has some great grooves, some cool sounds, and some just odd ideas that I think culminate to a pretty fun spin. While part of me has enjoyed some of the ironic, memey twinges that have cropped up throughout the last couple of Periphery records, part of me is just really glad that this new album, Pale White Dot, is just kind of a straightforward, cut the bullshit, heavy-ass record that has some emotional sort of explorations of oneself and sort of the problems one sees from within, while also having these moments of just like offbeat madness and, grand theatrics and the like, with some proggy ideas and heavy riffs backing it all. Not to say there's a very surface level presentation to parts of this, but I feel like this is probably the most just cut the bullshit Periphery experience I think I've heard since maybe their debut. Not to say that they like very much get up their own ass in exploring concepts. I don't think that at all. I've enjoyed that for better or worse in some parts of their discography by and large. It's weird to say that I'm a day one-ish Periphery fan, but I really have, I guess, been following this band since their genesis. But again, I do just kind of like them just writing just like a bunch of really solid songs to show that they still got chops as a band. And also, it's probably the leanest record they've given us in like a long time. And I also really appreciate that. It's kind of in and out, but it's got a lot of really heavy ideas and some solid production that I think helps accent their fantastic bass work that has some fun riffage and just add some real crunch and bite to their guitars. There's some acoustic stuff that I don't necessarily love the production of, but I think that like by and large, the production they pulled together on this is aces. Like, Carry On obviously has its big explosion, but I think the build-up to that explosion is kind of meh. And I like Neon Valley and Heaven on High fine enough, but the solos are the best parts of those songs. Like, Unlocking's a great melody-driven jam. A lot of the non-shouted vocals on, like, Everyone Dies Alone lend to the emotion of that song really strongly. And the guitar work on those songs is sick. The solo work is just fucking aces. It's choice. And as far as, like, lending to other lyrics I'm wanting to tackle, I think that, like, the purpose of soft versus melodic is, like, handled purposefully. But, like, man, Subhuman's bass is crazy good. Mr. God is sick as fuck. Like, the opening stretch of this record is really, really cool. Like, there's just a lot of cool ideas that this album is firing off with that I absolutely love. The parts where they have, like, synth stings and, like, electronic breaks get their own points to breathe. They have their own point in the space that I think it occupies well. I threw this on my radar just because I've been, like, a diehard, damn near day one Periphery fan. I've always thought they were a really solid metal band, so I'm always down to check out what they've got going on, but, like, I honestly kind of like this. Like, I think this is a really solid record. It's not my favorite in the discography, but I like that it feels kind of like a breath of fresh air in this band's discography that I think makes it feel better than some of the, like, lull vibes that were on, again, the last couple of self-titles. I'm giving this a 7. I could see it growing depending on how much time I spend with it over the next 6 months, but, like, I like this album. If you haven't spun the new Periphery, It's kind of solid, man. Now, while this new Turnover album is following up what I would argue is easily my least favorite of theirs, I've Spun, I would never count this band out. They are an incredibly consistent band at the very least, and while their last album was a bit of a pivot, this album sees them sort of like finding themselves back in some worlds of sonic comfort that I think they sort of wear really, really well. You know, there's still a sense of groove that permeates throughout parts of this, but it more feels in line with, like, how they've written songs throughout records like Human Nature and the, you know, adored classic Peripheral Vision. The sonics more fall in line with that album. There's a hazy sort of, like, love of, you know, shoegaze adjacent sounds, you know, and you know, reverb soaked guitars that like very much feel like a warm blanket of comfort for these guys, and I think that it works for them well to sell some of the more emotional, you know, twinges of this record throughout the likes of like My Hand is a Curtain, or even again put a groove in a world of comfort like amidst the album Pieces, whose leads very much feel very in line with what they were tackling on a record like Human Nature, but sort of like evolves it in a way that I absolutely love. And if we're going to talk about other high-energy pieces that absolutely crank the heat in the track listing, Little Bees Don't Bite very much bites in a way that almost borders on like a Silver Sun pickup style and use of a crunchier production. You know, it's great juxtaposition from the other upbeat moments and of high energy that coat the track listing, like I'm Up, I'm Up. Not in a bad, not that those songs are bad, it's just an interesting pairing that I think this band tackles well. I also like that they have some moments to let the guitars really get a bit more of a bite to them in a way that I think, again, they just kind of evolve into well throughout the lenses of ultra sensitive and adds to the texturing amidst the emotions of Off Into the Lonesome Sky. This is just a really solid bounce back for these guys, in my opinion, and I really appreciate what they pulled together here. It's a really, really, really solid record. I feel like if you enjoy this band and you want them to see, and you want to see them sort of like sit in a world of comfort, this is the place to do it. Giving it a 7 out of 10. It's a really solid record. The other album I closed this month out with was the new Boards of Canada album, Inferno, an album that I was admittedly pretty excited for. While they have blind spots in their discography to me, like there's parts of their career I haven't really checked out. The albums are theirs I do love. And I was digging the world they were sort of teasing us with in the promo iconography for this album. You know, like the promo cycle for this had some just cool ideas. It seemed like they were trying to strike. You know, this album does feel like it has a concept. On the other side, it's sort of trying to aim for with some of the sample-driven songs like Father and Son and The Word Becomes Flesh. You know, they sort of like seem to talk about life or birth and, you know, ties with maybe religion, you know, could be a cult. You know, it has this very like, it has what feels like purpose in the beginning, because even the intro through Hydrogen, Helium, Lithium, Leviathan, it feels like it's very much trying to like bring the listener in to this idea of this like very retro styled cult. You know, like, it has the sonics that I enjoy. You know, while it's not quite to the same effect, it very much feels like similar to when Venetian Snares was trying to do traditional synthesizer music, like very traditional, old-school synthetic stuff. It very much isn't that, but the moments where they try that, I think, are interesting. And that's fine that it's not necessarily that. I do think the moments where they more kind of keep it ambient but have some beat construction do lend to some solid moments in the back half, like through Naraka or All Reason Departs. And even the pairing of All Reason Departs and Arena Americana Nada has this like little nugget that feels like a sort of evolution of what I've at least heard from them in the past. You know, I dig the sonics. I just really wish it kind of dug deeper on what it's trying to throw in your face. You know, because I dig those moments, you know. I dig the almost like old school trip hop sounds of father and son, and some of the ideas within Age of Capricorn. You know, I really dig the sounds of Age of Capricorn. You know, those moments where they reach this sort of like cinematic view that almost lend themselves to feeling like a Year Zero by Nine Inch Nails in sort of world building, like Into the Magic Land, this calm, synthetic, just chopped up loop almost, just lulling in the background after the word becomes flesh, sort of like throws a lot of like really grim or like disgusting imagery out at you to kind of like make you uneasy. It's an interesting pairing of moods that I do enjoy, and the album tries to sort of like toe that in other ways, but some of those ways just aren't effective in my opinion. But the album just has this like really wonky pacing on top of this like kind of surface level idea scratching that just lends to like a solid spin, but I don't think it's gonna land amongst my favorites in the band's catalog. It's one that I threw on and I was really into, but then it didn't stick, and every time I tried to respin it, I kind of had like some fun times. I did, you know, again, the ideas, just kind of left me wanting more. I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. It's really, really solid, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be anywhere on my favorites of the year list. And those are my thoughts on what I spun in May. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts on the records that I talked about in the comments down below, along with any records from this year that I haven't talked about yet that you would like to see me tackle on this segment. Again, if you like this, give it a like. Thank you so much for doing so, and thank you so much for subscribing if you chose to do that as well. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. It's already ready to go. It's queued. I got the 30th episode of Roguelite Run dropping this weekend. It is another revisit, and I think you guys will enjoy it. Either way, I'm gonna go. Thank you so much again for joining me. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations. Take care, and I will see you another day.